Back to polytheism, which, by the way, we'll start out with. Polytheism is bad and it's wrong, so don't be a polytheist. Because as I mentioned, that polytheism is always connected, the demonic is what the scripture connects it with. And then two, what you've got is a magical worldview. And again, I have a demonology occult course you can take as an elective, but I think it's significant that we show why polytheism is something to avoid. And again, just go to the Old Testament, the New Testament, and we can see that the gods are connected with a magical worldview. So for example, when we look at a text like Isaiah chapter 47, verses 8 through 15, I can say, this is really, it's like Matthew 7, 15 through 20. It's one of those scary passages where people think they are following God and they find out in the end they've been deceived either by themselves or someone else, and they end up in judgment. In this case, in Isaiah 47, 8 through 15, you want to get people's attention? Here you go. Demons, judge the occult, and the judgment of God. Here's your sermon title, okay? Because when you look at the context of Isaiah 47, what you've got is God now coming on judgment on these people. And so it'll take me a couple minutes here, but it's significant that we hear this whole passage because this connects our concepts here. It says, now then, this is verse 8, now then, hear this, you sensual ones, who dwell securely, who says in your heart, I am, and there is no one besides me. By the way, who says that? Isaiah 44:6, God says, I am, and there is no one beside me. This is Genesis 3 all over again. And by the way, every part of the occult is every individual trying to get enough power and knowledge to be his or her own God. That's what the occult is all about. So God is saying, all you people, as we'll see, you think you're your own God? You say, I am, and there is no one besides me? Well, here's the polytheism. And you say to yourselves, I shall not sit as a widow, nor shall I know the loss of children. But these two things shall come on you suddenly in one day, loss of children and widowhood. They shall come on you in full measure, in spite of your many sorceries, in spite of the great power of your spells. And you felt secure in your wickedness, and said, no one sees me. For your wisdom and your knowledge they have deluded you. For you have said in your heart, I am, and there is no one besides me. But evil will come to you, which you will not know how to charm away. And disaster will fall on you, for which you cannot atone. And destruction, about which you do not know, will come on you suddenly. So, now in verse 12, God's mocking them. So, stand fast now in your spells and in your many sorceries with which you have labored from your youth. Perhaps you'll be able to profit. Perhaps you can cause trembling. You are wearied with your many counsels. Let now the astrologers, those who prophesy by the stars, those who predict by the new moon, stand up and save you from what will come on you. Behold, they have become like stubble. Fire burns them. They cannot deliver themselves from the flame and the power of the flame. There will be no coal by which to warm, nor a fire to sit before. So have those become to you, with whom you have labored, who you have trafficked with from your youth. Each has wandered in his own way. There is none to save you. See, this is where polytheism and false gods end up. You get the promise of secret power and knowledge to be able to cure the effects of the fall. I can use magic and defense magic to protect myself from my enemies. I can do this for healing. I can do this. It's trying to reverse the effects of the fall without God. So in the occult, ultimately, while you acknowledge other gods, which may be the source of your power, ultimately you want to become one. And that's where we see right back to Genesis 3. The day you eat the fruit, your eyes will be open, and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil, the devil says. That's the promise of your own independent, again, godhood, if you just get enough power and knowledge. And this was the great error in the history of the world, where all of the cultures, besides the biblical monotheism, were just steeped in this magical polytheism and the problem of demon worship and with the idols. So Significantly here, you get to the New Testament, and it's the same thing with the Greek, the Romans. You get to the book of Acts, and you get to the temple of Artemis, and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, they're still living in the polytheistic, magical worldview, and people are concerned with the demonic world. But that's why we rejoice that God has given us power over the enemy to be able to deal with this. So again, more on that, but ultimately when we look at polytheism, you're dealing with the demonic when you're dealing with false gods. And so some examples of this: contemporary Mormonism. Now, when we talk about Mormonism, I teach a Cults of America class. Roughly, there are actually about 120 Mormon denominations in the United States. But when people say Mormon, they're thinking about the big one, the mothership located in Salt Lake City as a denomination. This is the one that claims about 15 million members, has about 60,000 missionaries. And this is the one that teaches clearly and forcefully that, yes, you can become a god. If you work hard enough, if you're good enough, eventually you can get exalted to godhood and be like the billions and trillions, and as one of their apostles, Bruce McConkie, said, like the other infinite number of true gods that have been exalted to godhood. So that is one contemporary example. Very important concept here. When we use the word pagan, and now we tend to talk about it as neo-paganism because it's the revival of these ancient pagan religions. Well, it's important to note that the Latin word pagan or paganas just means rural or rural people. So why do we call them pagans then? Because when Christianity takes over as the majority religion in the culture and looks down at the open practice of, again, magical polytheism, that the people who still wanted to practice and follow the old ways of magic and the gods, plural, had to go to the outskirts of Christian civilization. Hence, they were the rural people, the pagans, okay? And then the same thing, why we use the term the occult, because if you're going to stay in Christian civilization, you have to practice this stuff in secret. The word occult means secret or hidden. So we call these practices occult because they're magical practices that have to be done in secret, which ultimately end up in three categories. There's magic or sorcery that has to do with acquiring and redirecting power. There's divination and fortune telling, which has to do with acquiring secret knowledge to be used to your own good. And then there's spiritism, which is usually contacting a spirit to either energize your magic or to get knowledge or to ask them to do something on your behalf. So that's why, again, the vast majority in world religions we had where the church grew, polytheism and the magical worldview waned. But as the church gets weak, and now we have, quote, liberal gospels, which are no gospel at all, and people don't get saved, there's a lot of people that go and explore new spirituality. And that spirituality is Wicca, and all sorts of other types of neo-paganism, witchcraft, and so forth. So that's what we get with polytheism. Then as a quick note, another type of polytheism is, and it's significant here, it's called henotheism. And here, significant, the Greek word hen is, as compared, for example, to the word monos. Monos, as a Greek word or adjective, has the idea of being one and only one, only, alone, by yourself, and so forth. Where if even though the ordinal number, and it can be a cardinal number like 1, hen, the word can be masculine, feminine, or neuter, hes, mia, or hen in New Testament Greek. Hen, the neuter, technically means one thing, but when it's used for henotheism, it's actually a type of polytheism that says, yes, there's lots of true gods, but there is a chief god among them, okay? That's henotheism. Lots of true gods, but a supreme god among them. And that would be, the Greek and Roman systems would technically be henotheistic, because you had, Zeus as the head of the gods, or, Apollo as the head of the gods. And I only want to note that because it's still polytheism. But the Mormon church is very quick to say, oh, no, we're not polytheists, we're henotheists, because there's only one God for this planet. So that's again, a significant factor for them is you better understand what henotheism is, because if you're going to do some evangelism or witnessing to Mormons, they're going to correct you and say that they're henotheists and say, yeah, guess what? But yeah, a henotheist saying, yeah, there are lots of gods, but we only worship one of them, it's still polytheism. So same critiques apply as they do for the others. And then real quick note before we take another break. Well, we've got the concept of dualism, where all reality is divided up into opposing powers or substances or concepts, but there's only two of them. Like you have an equal balance of good and evil, or God and the devil are equal. And I mean, this is where you see, yin-yang ideas of counterbalancing principles, but this is just not correct. You don't have evil to counterbalance good. What's important, again, in biblical monotheistic Christian theology, evil is not a substance or a force, it's the absence of good. And that's significant because in dualistic worldviews, essentially you have zero solution to the problem of evil. You've got eternal evil that's balancing eternal good. Well, why choose one or the other if they're both eternally necessary? So we'll get to more discussions on our discussion boards on that topic. But in the end, what you've done is reduce God to the level of the devil, ultimately, that they're both balancing each other and co-equal in power and might and so forth. So that's the concept of dualism. And again, lots of problems with that. Finally, you get the false monotheistic views like Unitarianism and deism, where, again, in deism, you have a creator monotheistic God. And so you could use things like the Kalam cosmological argument, intelligent design arguments, and things like that to argue for a deistic God, because now we know there's a personal, powerful being who's intelligent, who caused the universe to come into existence a limited amount of time ago, and this being must be, the agent cause who self-exists, and so on and so forth. All of that, guess what? A deist would also make that same kind of case. But a deist, which is really kind of the opposite of a pantheist as far as you can get, a deist believes that God is transcendent, but really that God is not immanent at all. God might be in his being omnipresent in the creation, but there is never any active ongoing relation with the creation. There, God only works by secondary means, and that everything is governed by natural law. So that's deism, is God is, it's an old Bette Midler tune, watching us from a distance, but never intervenes in creation. And that's why a true deist doesn't pray, because God never intervenes and answers prayers. So that was it's a rationalist kind of monotheism that exists. More on that when we get to divine providence and the problems of deism. I'll give you one of them. One of the problems with deism, if God is not present and active in the culture all the time, and there's no solution to the problem of evil, but then what you have are individually created things that have the property of what we call essential aseity, that they actually have existence in themselves even though they've been created. And yet we tend to see that divine aseity is one of those incommunicable properties, that only God has existence from himself because everything else began to exist from God. So we get to those conceptual problems with deism a little bit later. And then Unitarianism, we'll get to this as defective views of monotheism. A Unitarian is ultimately a monotheist who has a one-person God, and yet that one-person God will in fact intervene in the creation, which is, of all the false monotheistic views, Unitarianism is the most popular. So Muslims would be Unitarians, Jehovah's Witnesses would be Unitarians, more Unitarian Universalists, those who would still hold to a monotheistic God, would be Unitarians. There's a one-person monotheistic creator who actually answers prayer and intervenes. So that's finishes our view on defective views of God. Next, we're going to pick up Not on every argument for the existence of God, because you're going to read some text on that. And we cover that text and we cover that topic in our philosophy of religion class. So to save time, I'm going to give an overview on how to think about various types of arguments. And then we'll move on from there. Anyway, see you in the next video.